back to Standout Medical Careers, the series of conversations with doctors about all things medical career. I'm Anita Fletcher. In today's episode, we meet Dr Antonio Di Dio. Antonio describes himself as a medical doctor, volunteer, and advocate for the vulnerable. Just before we hear about Antonio's motivations and achievements, I need to tell you that if you want notifications of when I release a new episode, or if you want to get a free checklist to help you deliver a strong interview performance, go to the Standout Medical Careers website and sign up for my newsletter, standoutmedicalcareers.com.au. Dr Antonio Di Dio is a practicing clinician with over 30 years experience, combined with ongoing service through several significant federal and state medical policy roles, providing outcomes to improve the well-being of Australians. Antonio further serves the community in health policy leadership roles, bringing extensive clinical, stewardship and governance experience to continue a lifelong drive to improve health outcomes for all. His latest new role is with the Professional Services Review in Canberra. With a long-held commitment to train and mentor others, Antonio has actively taught junior and senior doctors in clinical and professional contexts. He has also provided 24/7 counselling services for health practitioners in psychological need over 2 decades. As a partner in a busy, successful medical practice, Antonio combines clinical work with numerous voluntary roles to provide better outcomes in areas of public policy and to the most vulnerable members of our community. Some of his many achievements include the establishment of a free clinic for Indigenous children to address immediate need while on a lengthy public waiting list, and holding the position of chairperson, International Health Assessment Panel under Medevac legislation 2019, assessing claims of refugees from Manus Island and Nauru. Hi, Antonio. Thanks for taking the time to chat today. How are you going?
Really well, thanks, Anita. Thanks for having me on your show.
Oh, well, it's always a pleasure to see you and hear about your amazing feats within your clinical roles and other activities that I know you're doing. So before we get into your very rich career background, I'd love to hear about your current role and what that entails. So what is the Professional Services Review, and what does a day in the life working for the PSR look like?
The PSR, or Professional Services Review, is an agency of government, which it's actually one of the very small agencies, and it's part of the Department of Health. And it assesses potential inappropriate uses of Medicare funding. So generally it looks at health practitioners, doctors and many others who may or may not have billed Medicare inappropriately. And so it's a regulatory agency which has a lot of lovely people working in it, mostly lawyers, but traditionally since it started it's been led by a doctor.
Mm-hmm. Okay, wonderful.
My role is not the director of the agency, although I have been for the last month, but I'm her deputy in that role.
Right, okay. So what does a typical day look like for you there?
Well, I work at the agency the equivalent of 2.5 days a week, and generally I will assess the clinical records of medical practitioners who have been brought to the attention of the agency by Medicare. The agency only gets referrals from Medicare, not from any other source. And Medicare has its own investigators which review practice of doctors, nurses, chiropractors, dentists, you name it. And generally, the vast majority of times, Medicare is satisfied that practice is appropriate or practice has been changed. But sometimes when they cannot be sure, they refer to us. So I review case notes, but also we talk to doctors and health practitioners, legal representatives. We occasionally have court actions, and we also have some reporting obligations, whether it's to the medical boards or AHPRA or other agencies. So it's quite a legal type role.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, it must be very interesting and a really nice balance to your other work as well. And I wonder, so do sometimes matters come to the agency's attention and the medical practitioners state that they're unaware of what the requirements are with Medicare?
Yes, Anita, that's true. And I've seen that firsthand on many occasions in my other volunteer roles, where I do a lot of advocacy for doctors. In particular, working with AHPRA at the moment in helping them to develop a suicide prevention strategy and a depression prevention strategy in the doctors that come up before them. Because whether it's AHPRA or the medical board or any regulatory agency, for a doctor to appear before them is extremely stressful.
Mm.
It's vitally important to protect the integrity of the system and to protect patients from inappropriate practice and inappropriate or unsafe conduct. My life has been devoted to looking after doctors, and many of them become very, very anxious and unwell when they go through a regulatory experience. And I'm very, very acutely aware that we need to support them as much as we can, even when they're going through this process, even when they have finished the process and are found to have done the wrong thing. To me, that's not the end of anybody's life or career or profession. It's simply a supportive and educative process. Right.
And that's why I was asking with Medicare as well, because I'm aware during my time at the AMA there was some development of some Medicare training modules created by the AMA's Dr Portal Learning team, and I thought that apparently that was a hugely valuable resource. So I'll give that a bit of a plug now in case there's anyone listening that thinks, oh yes, I'm not too sure about how it works. And I mean, it must be incredibly onerous to for people to get their heads around all of those requirements, as well as managing everything else in their professional lives.
Oh, Anita, you're so right. And the AMA has advocated so passionately for improvement of the practitioner experience appearing before all regulatory bodies. So that, in particular, there's an annual meeting with the Medical Board of Australia and AHPRA and the AMA in improving that practitioner experience. And I've been very fortunate to be a part of that every year. And the AMA is absolutely dedicated to ensuring that people get as fair a process as they possibly can when they appear before any regulator, because it is extraordinary. The numbers are unbelievable. Only a very small number of people ever get referred to PSA, and in any given year it's probably about 100 per year. But almost 7% of all practitioners, medical practitioners in this country, got a notification to AHPRA last year. 7% of all in 1 year. And 76% of all those people had no finding made against them.
Right.
So they went through this phenomenal pain, stress and hurt and distress with no finding made. So we've worked closely with AHPRA, and I can tell you that, AHPRA, they're good people. There's nobody there who deliberately sets out to make doctors miserable or unhappy.
Right.
Well-intentioned. But we have campaigned very much for them to be better resourced so that they can deal with these issues in as timely a fashion as possible, because for many doctors, even if they get the most absolutely fair go, they are very, very sensitive. That they associate their personal well-being and their identity with being not just a doctor, but being a good doctor and a good person. So the process itself, for a lot of people, is incredibly punitive.
Yes, and as you mentioned before, very distressing. And I wonder, so for people who may not be so familiar with the number of doctors in Australia, as an approximate figure, what does that 7% translate to? Is it about 10,000?
Oh, it's probably about 7 or 8% of clinicians.
Right.
And it was about 3% per annum for many years, and then it was about 5% per annum for probably about a decade. But in the last year and a half, it's gone up, the number of notifications. The AMA has worked with AHPRA in relation to trying to minimise the number of trivial or malignant referrals or notifications, and also to have the most streamlined triage system that they possibly can, so that the very trivial notifications can be dismissed as quickly as possible, and also to be done in a way, and it happened to one of my colleagues, and it was a fantastic outcome, in a way where instead of the practitioner going through 12 months of hell, they go through 12 minutes of anxiety, where they actually get a letter from AHPRA saying a notification has been made against you. We thought it was on the minor scale. We've investigated it. We found that you've got nothing to answer. Have a nice day.
Great.
And so the practitioner has fundamentally zero minutes or months of that angst. And to their great credit, AHPRA have done that with a certain proportion of the lower end of their notifications.
Excellent. That's great to hear. And you mentioned that time frame. It's obviously that 18 months, 2 years has been a time when people's sensitivities have been heightened. And I was going to ask you, because knowing what you've done as a supportive of doctors' health, what have you seen that you think could be some critical measures in addition to this process that doctors can take to ensure their well-being and their, I like to say, life-work balance rather than work-life balance? I'm a bit of an idealist there, but and what else should be done to help doctors, particularly given these circumstances of the last 2 years?
Well, the first two things I should say to preface any answer, Anita, is that firstly and foremost, what I've always been as a GP, I work Monday to Thursday in general practice. And secondly, I'm a monumental hypocrite, as are so many middle-aged men. I do a pretty lousy job of looking after my own health.
Yes.
General practice has been really tough in the last couple of years, tougher than usual. I mean, we had a decade of fundamentally no changes in Medicare rebates for consultations, and part of that decade was an absolute freeze. So incomes are pressured and eroded, costs kept going up and up, and then the stressors of COVID have been extraordinary. Going to work, wearing PPE and a mask and glasses, and not being able to see your computer screen, and not being able to talk to your patients or hug somebody who's crying. Those things have made practice unbelievably difficult. You're working harder and harder, you're earning less and less. So for many GPs, it's been an emotional struggle, a real challenge. And the calls to the Doctors' Health Advisory Service have increased slightly, and their complexity has probably increased as well. But it's hard. It's really hard working in medicine in Australia today. And, you know, I certainly couldn't survive in my practice without my partners, Ruchi and Jenny, without whom, you know, our practice would fall apart in a week if I was running it. You know, you need amazing colleagues to help and support each other, or you need to change the way that you practice in order to survive, and I mean survive emotionally. I never, ever want to practice in a way that doesn't give of yourself. You know, I never want to practice in a way where you don't really care about people and run the risk of being exhausted and burnt out and upset by sad things that happen to them. But some people do, because it's the only way that they can survive. I think it's a terrible way to practice, but I can understand why some people would do that.
Okay, and so in addition to your more than 30 years in general practice, I know that your career consists of other things. And what motivated you to seek out leadership and policy making opportunities in the early days of your career?
Well, I've been married for the same number of years, and I've never had any authority in my own home, so I sort it externally. No, I just love my partner Richie says that I'm just a talker, so I'm getting interviewed on your behalf, you bugger. I'll call you back. I'm sorry. Love you, boy. That was Walter. Said hello.
Oh, good.
So what I love is the notion that you can turn up to work every day, see a person one-on-one and help them. And that's what I saw with one of my greatest heroes, a bloke called Dr Gann, who was the GP in the little town I grew up with, who looked after the whole town. You know, he put me to sleep when I had my tonsils out and pulled me out of my mum, and he fixed my arm when I broke it playing footy, and you know, that's the guy I wanted to be. You see people one-on-one, and that's what general practice is about. But the other inspiration I had was a guy called Cactus, who every second year was the Shire president of our town, and he influenced everybody by going to endless meetings and, you know, passing the collection plate around at church on a Sunday night, and by dressing up as Santa Claus. I mean, and running the surf club. If there was... That man was involved in everything, and I guess that's what I like. So I like the idea that you can work with other good people and exert influence in a bigger way. Of course, the frustration about that is that often when you're dealing with government, you have to be extraordinarily patient, and you have far more losses than wins. But when I started doing it, I realised that you just meet lovely and like-minded people. I think when you go into some other fields, you might meet people who are motivated differently. But in medical politics, just about everything you do is voluntary. And so you meet other people whose motivations are lovely, and there's a 99% chance that they're going to be lovely people. And that's what I've certainly found.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and what would you say are some of the highlights of those experiences working with state and federal government shaping policy? Are there any particular things that stand out to you?
I think it was the culmination of years and years of advocacy to show politicians that they were dealing with advocates who were not lobbying for their own personal gain. I mean, obviously, the AMA tries to help support all of its many thousands of members with their conditions. But, you know, my labours have predominantly been in relation to chairing the International Health Assessment Panel and treatment of refugees, working on climate change, working on industrial issues for junior doctors and getting them remunerated appropriately, getting an equivalent of a Royal Commission in our state to assess bullying and workplace culture in the health system. Those things are hard work and they're painful, and you never get thanked or rewarded for it. But you do change conditions for other people in the long term, and you know, feel good about that and sleep better at night. But because of the advocacy, developing a pattern year after year of doing the right thing for the right reason, politicians look at the AMA, and particularly during the 2020 pointy end of the crisis, and say, what do you guys think? And they still lean very heavily on our federal president, Omar, for advice and support, and mobilising the support of medical practitioners. So I think that it's about relationship building and building of trust. Politicians, it would seem, go to two main groups. They go to groups who are powerful and frighten them, and they go to groups who are benevolent and they know doing the right thing for the right reason. And I like to think that we're in that second category. I would love to be powerful and scary, but I don't think we ever will be.
Right. And for the doctors listening who would like to know more, and I appreciate your really nice and succinct overview of some of the different roles that are carried out within the AMA, because I think a lot of people aren't too sure about, you know, some of the projects and the groups that are working within there. What were some of the key roles that you've held working with the AMA that potentially anyone interested in taking up some positions and getting more involved in that advocacy side of things?
At the moment, the AMA is led by a board, the federal board, which I'm privileged to be on, and also the Federal Council, which I'm also on. It has 8 federal and state presidents, and until a few months ago I was a state president. And it has half a dozen committees, and I'm fortunate enough to have served or serve on all of them. So there's an ethics committee, a public health committee, a mental health committee, an Indigenous Affairs task force, and a range of other subcommittees for people who have a passion and, you know, seem to have a passion for all of them. It's just, I love it. I really do. And we have an amazing secretariat, which you know all about, who actually do all the work. We talk and say, oh, wouldn't it be good if we did this, and wouldn't it be good if we did that, and we should report to that minister, and we should deliver these following things, and we should write a very well thought out 22-page paper on that. And then someone like you, Anita, does the well thought out 22-page paper that makes us look much smarter than we are.
Oh, I don't know about that, but I know I certainly know there's some very strong teams around the country of people who, as you say, are incredibly dedicated to those roles and making improvements. And one of the committees that I had some involvement with in New South Wales and federal AMA was the Doctors in Training Committee, and the enthusiasm. One of our
strongest and largest committees.
Yeah, and they're incredible. You know, they're really something to behold, and I think that's a wonderful entry point for any young doctors listening who'd like to, you know, who might be thinking about, well, how do I get into sort of some different activities and roles during my years in training to make, you know, even more of a difference and undertaking those sorts of things outside of their clinical work. So that's a really wonderful place for a lot of people to go to.
You're absolutely right, Anita. Our last... quite a few of our most recent federal presidents, including our current one, Omar Khorshid, started off in Doctors in Training student politics. I wish I'd done it at that age. I was specialising in binge drinking at that time. Surely not. But the young people who do it, they they are exposed to some amazing experiences, talking directly to government and to leaders, talking to the absolute tops of their profession. I mean, on Federal Council, for example, we have representatives from each of the college. Many of them are college presidents, the state presidents, and the doctors in training certainly in my experience, are treated absolutely, not just with patronising respect, but they are equals at the table at every single one of those meetings. And we learn more from them than they learn from us. And I think that the experiences that they have in learning how to lead and actually being challenged and told, look, we really want to hear what you say. What you've said is amazing. We need you to lead this. We need you to help draft this policy. We need you to go back to your members, or whether they are med students or residents or registrars. We need you to come back to us and tell us what you think. And that actually puts them under a fascinating bit of pressure. And you see their confidence and their skills grow. And then you see them a couple of years down the track and you think, what on earth is this young doctor doing, being so articulate and so brilliant? And you realise that they've actually been doing this for 10 years already. And they're not just our future medical leaders, they are our future leaders, full stop.
Yes, yeah. I couldn't agree more, Antonio. So thank you for that. And aside from your work in general practice, tell us about some of your and your policy development and some of these other many roles that you've undertaken. Could you tell us about some of your other professional area interests in the arenas in which you've been able to pursue those? So perhaps outside of the AMA?
Anita, I do a few other things. Again, you do one thing, you get interested, and then you move on to the next one. So you don't move on to the next one. Well, you're supposed to. I don't. I continue and do the next one, but keep doing the previous one. So you end up with this bloody collection of jobs, but that's fine. So I started off doing the Medical Benevolent Association, which is an organisation that for a century now collects donations from doctors and distributes it to doctors in financial distress. And that one I stopped doing when I left Sydney, but I still have warm friendships with the people who run it. And that then led me to the Doctors' Health Advisory Service, which is the equivalent of a lifeline counselling service on an urgent basis, which then develops into a more detailed health provision. And that I've been doing that for 25 years and doing it in the ACT on my own for a long time. But I'm now developing a team in the ACT of people, including my friend who just called, to take the calls. And the Doctors' Health Service is a federal board, which I'm privileged to serve on, which distributes funds to the individual state advisory services. I also do a little bit of teaching, run a general practice with my partners. I love the little micro practice that I have outside the window there in Parliament House, where I get to see lots of interesting people who have a different set of medical problems. Once you get old enough and fat enough, you start sponsoring things. So I support the Bell Shakespeare Company, and I support the Australian crime writers and the Australian comic book writers. And
that's right. Yeah, excellent. So,
but it comes up. It appears in your in tray as a calendar invite. And you go, oh yeah, better get on with that too.
Yes. Great, thank you. Such a diverse range of interests, Antonio, and I find that a lot of doctors whose CVs I see are similar, and I think that's wonderful to demonstrate that it's such a rich career in so many ways. But I appreciate you talking about the other services as well, because I feel sometimes, and this particularly might be of interest to the non-medical practitioner listeners that are listening in, because I think that people in the general public can often think that, oh, why would a doctor need any help or support? They've kind of got it all sewn up. So when I started doing this work as a career coach and advisor, people said to me, why would they need help? So I appreciate you talking through that.
That's a great observation, Anita. I have so many doctor patients, and they are spectacularly inept, so many of them, as I am, at trying to build a career of any kind, because we never get taught that sort of thing.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say spectacularly inept, but not aware of or across every single experience that's potentially out there when it comes to forging a career, which, not everybody sort of appreciates that. But I think that also a lot of people don't appreciate the enormous amount of training and research and all of the other things that doctors need to do in order to progress through their careers. So that's really helpful, and I'm sure for doctors listening as well, that if it increases awareness of those support organisations that are out there, then this conversation's certainly been worth having. And so what about networking? You mentioned I know you're in Canberra and you spend a fair bit of time around Parliament House and various other places. So networking must have been an important part of your career. What advice would you give to doctors starting out and wanting to build professional networks?
Anita, that's a good question, and I think it's taken me ages to figure out how I truly feel about that. But I have now, and that is, and at the risk of sounding homespun and patronising, my whole family, I'm originally from Sicily and country New South Wales, very, very matriarchal, very poor, and everything is based on relationships, absolutely everything. And so if your grandmother or your mum doesn't like what you're doing, you're not going to be doing it for very long. And everything is based on who knows who. Now, it's difficult in some ways, but it's beautiful, mostly. And so in general practice, we have the extraordinary fortune that 30, 40, 50 times a day, somebody's going to walk in the door. And, unless you're pretty cold, you're going to say, what's your name? What do you do? And so many of my most wonderful friends have met through general practice. But it doesn't have to be general practice. It can be any area, whether it's inside medicine or outside. Your clients are often the people that you mostly meet, and a lot of them turn out to just be lovely people. Mm-hmm. Second and most vitally important thing is that people you meet, under no circumstances should you view them as a networking opportunity or an opportunity to benefit yourself. Mm. And again, this sounds like insincere guff that you read in an American self-help book, but I assure you it's truth, and it's the underpinning of my life, Anita. When you meet someone, it's really important that you view the connection that you make with them really, really respectfully and in a way that is either mutually beneficial or entirely beneficial to the person that you meet, not to you. And it took me like 20 years to figure that out. Not because I wasn't doing it, not because I was some kind of bad transactional person who only met people in order to use them. Quite the opposite. Some of my friends went into politics when we were very young, and I was almost vaccinated against networking by the way that they behaved. You know, that 1,000-yard stare where a person's looking at you, but then within about 60 seconds, they're looking over your shoulder at the next person that they might going to talk to because they're not interested in you anymore. Mm. So I have always tried to be interested in the other person and how I can help them. And it's only after years and years that you detect this pattern in your own life where you think, or people ask you, how come you know all those people and how come they call you? And I like to think they call me because they're calling a friend and they are right. They are calling a friend. They're not calling me because I'm in that role or that role or that role. They're calling me because I've known them for years. We've been to the footy together. We're friends, and they'd like my advice because I happen to be in that role and know that person. Every, murderous, gangster, organised criminal sees themselves in that way as well. I'm just a guy who helps a guy. But I see myself in that way, and I hope I'm not deluded. I think if you are only there to help people, occasionally you will just be used all the time. But most of the time, when people know that you're not interested in anything from them, then they learn a bit about generosity and kindness as well. So I think the most important thing about networking, I'm sorry to be so verbose about it, but I feel really strongly about it. The most important thing about networking is don't do it for yourself. Somebody can tell if you're using them to climb a ladder. That's just gross.
Yes. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that's the thing that comes across in interviews too, is the panellists can see through any sort of signs of inauthenticity. And I think that people have built-in radars, so we can all detect when we come across that person who's only there in it for themselves, or there for the wrong reasons. So I think that's very good advice, Antonio. Thank you. And I ask that because a lot of doctors say to me they feel very uncomfortable networking, and they want to meet people. And I think, like you say, get to know people, show a genuine interest in them, and see how you can work together. And it goes from there.
Very, very much so.
And finally, is there another particular pearl of wisdom that you'd like to impart, especially in particular to the doctors in training who are listening?
Well, I warned people at a speech I gave at Sydney Uni last month, beware middle-aged blokes pontificating at you. But taking the risk of it, I think don't be the hypocrite that I am. Don't work too much.
Right.
Don't skimp on your self-care. I really believe that if you try to have, I've never heard that expression, life-work balance. It's a nice one. If you can get a bit of that, well done. I reckon the one thing that I've learned most in the last decade in my general practice work, though, is try as hard as you can. It may not always be possible, but try to work with people that you respect and, if possible, love. I work with my friends, and that has made a really difficult job much, much easier. So if you're in a position where you're thinking, wow, I've got to choose between this option and that option, and they're kind of similar, I would strongly suggest that you look at the human beings that you'll be with rather than the nuts and bolts that you'll be doing, particularly if it's a long-term commitment. Try to ally yourself to people with good values.
Yep. Wonderful. Well, what a great way to end, Antonio, and thank you very much for sharing some of your experiences this evening. And how can listeners learn more about you or possibly get in touch?
Probably the easiest way is at my practice. which is in Yarralumla ACT, but also I'm on LinkedIn, which has an email address. I'm trying to think of what wisdom I might have to help people. It's very kind of you to think that people would benefit from talking to me, but they're very welcome to.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again, Antonio. Very generous as always, and I look forward to catching up with you in person at some point soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Anita.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of Standout Medical Careers. If you like the episode or think it will be useful to someone else, please leave a review at podchaser.com. And if you've got any questions, let me know on LinkedIn at Standout Medical Careers. And remember, the better you articulate your story, the more you will stand out.